Thank you for being at today's City and County of Honolulu Climate Change Commission meeting. The major theme of today's meeting is going to be continuing on with climate change and risk. Today, taking a deeper dive into building codes. But before we begin, we'll do sort of our regular business. Ms. Long, can you help with the roll call, please?
Of course. Commissioner Compton?
Here.
Commissioner Fletcher?
Here.
Commissioner Alegado?
Here.
Commissioner Keeler?
Here.
Commissioner Maynard?
Here.
We have 5 out of 5 commissioners here. We have 4.
Great, thank you. Next we'll move to approval of our last meeting, September 18th minutes. Does anybody have any edits to the draft that was circulated?
One word on page 4, second line in. Heave should be heat.
Good catch. Anything else? I get a motion to approve the minutes as amended.
So moved.
Second. All in favor? Aye. All right, minutes adopted. Next, we call up Director Stanberg to give us an update on the Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resilience.
Thanks, Chair. Members of the Commission. The office right now is doing a fair amount of public outreach around formation of a climate action plan. This is part of our commitment under the Paris Climate Agreement. We're doing public outreach right now, 10 public meetings around the island, and potentially more. We actually had a couple requests to add meetings, and so we may add a couple. We've done 2 so far. The office has developed sort of a game that the public can play that helps prioritize how they would like to see a transition to a carbon-free economy happen. And so we would encourage folks to come to that. There's one tomorrow night in Hawaii Kai at the library at 7 p.m. and then a whole series of other meetings from now till the end of the year that you can find on our website. And so for members of the public and anyone else that's interested in helping shape what the climate action plan will look like for our island, this is a chance to come in and do education and also to help inform how that rolls out. This is the first phase of the public outreach, and then there will be sort of technical help later to form a full-blown climate action plan in terms of policies and projects that should be adopted that will come out next year. Also, one of Mayor's commitments around climate has been around a tree planting goal, 100,000 trees throughout the island over the next few years, and then also maintaining our canopy at 35% canopy cover, which is really the main defense we have against heat. So having a shade element in the urban area, so the 35% is in the urban area. The office has developed an application, a web-based application that tracks where the trees are being planted on island. Doesn't just have to be city-based efforts; it can be any efforts on island. That'll be unveiled on Arbor Day, and I want to thank Matt Gonzer in our office who built that and has been working with non-city partners outside as well, the state organizations and others to roll that out to partners. I know that we just had some discussion around the Moody's and some of the, you guys have been looking at risk and finance around climate. I wanted to let you know that Moody's did reach back out to the city again and asked specifically whether we have a hazard mitigation plan that deals with climate change. And one of the contractor for the new update is here, Gary Chalk, who has agreed to incorporate climate change throughout. I think that's the idea, is that it will be incorporated throughout on the next iteration. Climate change is only mentioned once in our current hazard plan. So Moody's asked if we reference climate change in our natural hazard plans. They asked if we had a climate action plan, which we do not have, and we're putting together now, and a sustainability plan for the city, which we do not have, and we're putting together a resilience strategy for the city. also asked what projects are in our capital budget that will potentially, are in preparation for dealing with, climate issues. So the sense is that they are asking several, maybe all of the cities that they work with to gather this very baseline information, what cities have in the way of planning. I don't know how they're gonna use it, but I thought it would be of interest to you as a commission that's been looking into this, that they did just request that, and I think the due date was today. The other thing I wanted to point out really quickly, at the federal level, there was a Disaster Recovery Reform Act, which was just passed by Senate, and it amends the FEMA Stafford Act. There's probably people in the room that are better equipped to deal with what this actually means for us, but what we noticed in the office is that it will increase the amounts available for mitigation efforts as opposed to payouts on the back end of disasters. And I think this is an immediate reflection of the number of disasters tripling since the 1980s, that's obviously linked to climate change, and the federal Treasury recognizing that this is an unsustainable burn rate on cash on the back ends of disaster issues. And so they are increasing the amount of mitigation funds available to try to head off some of these losses and risks. It did mention that there would be increased incentives for local jurisdictions adopting improved building standards. I don't know specifically what those are, if it's building codes or if it's location and siting, but the very issues that you're talking about right now, it looks like those will have a higher sort of lens and elevation in the new FEMA funding guidelines coming out. I did want to let you know, our office, as you know, has been really aggressive about trying to go out and get other funds from outside the city and build our capacity. It looks like we will be able to hire a position in our office that's just focused on hazard mitigation and building a long-term recovery strategy. So we're hopeful that this is potentially good timing if there are more federal funds available for hazard mitigation. We actually have some, a dedicated person to help curate applications from the city and build strong applications, and then work the federal funding that we could get more funds in, and take some of the sort of the overhead and back office away from some of the other city departments that have had to work on those today. So that's it.
Thanks. Are there questions?
Yeah, I have a couple questions. Can you provide more detail about the demographics of who's being reached by these these public outreach meetings? In other words, are we getting the same group of people that we always get? Are we reaching out further into the community?
So we have tried to co-host, and in fact, every single city council member has agreed to co-host at least one meeting. And so instead of just us using our listserv, the council members in each district are sending it out to folks in their local constituency. That seems to have helped in terms of bringing in folks that we haven't seen before. There are folks that are really concerned about climate, and they show up to the meetings, and they're sort of usual suspects. But the first two meetings, most of the people I didn't know, and we got a chance to meet new faces and individuals in there. We're always wanting to get more folks in, so if there are specific communities that haven't been reached, that would like to have us come and host a meeting, we're happy to do that. As you can imagine, the public meeting route is always sort of tough just by nature of who can show up. We've tried to play with the times in each of the zones as well, so that as we're further out, we're starting the meetings later so that people have time to get back home after work. We're not doing them in the middle of the day. And I want to thank our staff for doing the late night meeting routine on a weekly basis as we do these.
Yeah,
But do you have any suggestions?
Well, I just think it's extremely important to make sure that we include underrepresented groups, not just different demographics, different classes, working class, middle class, also elderly, whoever is going to be most affected, most vulnerable by these changes. So I know it's hard,
Yeah,
but
yeah. And if you have any suggestions about groups to
rural versus urban.
reach out to, or networks that you think are vibrant, that would be interested, we'd love to follow up on that. We will have a communications position back in the office probably
we reached out to schools, and I'm bringing this up because I have a 13-year-old, and she comes home and she says, "Mom, you should be doing this." And
We probably told her that.
if you did, that'd be awesome. But there is something to be said about the fire that young generation has, and the passion to make a difference. And I wonder, I mean, someone like that is gonna drag the parents to a meeting they otherwise wouldn't have attended.
Yeah, absolutely. So, over the past year, we have been to several schools. We did a presentation to the leaders, what was the leaders group out in Kapolei that you guys,
It was a youth, leaders group.
yeah, it was like 200 different youth that were like leaders from different schools that were together for kind of, it was like a model
Model
UN,
UN.
model UN kind of thing. And they asked us to come out and we did a presentation, and it was one of the, better, you know, sort of, enthusiastic and energetic reactions that we've gotten from the crowd. Immediately following our outreach in Pearl City, the council members' staff asked us to do something with Barrington High School. So we're probably being more reactive in terms of invitations, but again, if there's opportunities to plug in, if there's a network, we're always looking for opportunities.
I had a follow-up on the Moody's requests that came into the city. I was wondering sort of what route do those requests come through? And what has been, you know, besides the checklist of yes, we have this or no, we haven't, what kind of conversation has that spurred within the city?
I wouldn't be able to represent that there was much more than it came in. It got farmed out to several departments. I know DDC, DEM, us, I think we were on the routing from the budget and fiscal services. So everything's gonna come into budget and fiscal services. They have the relationship with the raters, but then BFS will reach out to the different departments that do have, you know, construction projects or are, you know, tracking, like the Department of Emergency Management, which handles the hazard mitigation plan, to ask is, you know, what do we have in the way of this? I wouldn't know if there was other conversations. I don't think so, because I did talk to the deputy of BFS and said we just gonna take it and send it back to them. But I did ask him to share if there's some sort of aggregation of the different cities' responses that Moody's shares back with the city, that we would like to see that. And I'd be happy to share that with the commission if we get that.
That'd be great, thank you.
Does the Moody's rating evaluate, existing building codes as well?
It didn't ask for that information.
Is that stuff they've already collected?
No,
No?
I don't think so. I think that this was just a simple, this is probably one of the first asks that they've had of a city. It was very preliminary based on the kind of information.
Can we get a copy of the response that you sent back?
I can check.
Other questions or comments?
Yes. Maybe more for Matt. You know about Camilo Mora and his Million Trees project?
Yes.
That would put us well over our 100,000.
I did the math too, it occurred to me.
I owe Camilo a email.
Seems like a natural partnership there. That Moody's thing is really interesting. And the Stafford Act, has it been signed into law?
I don't think so. Do you know, Karen?
And your new position in hazard mitigation, is it advertised? Is it?
Not yet. So,
Approved?
it was approved, the position is there and approved, but the funding, we're still waiting on, because the funding's not coming through the city, we're still waiting on the funding to be properly papered, and then hopefully by the end of the year we'll be able to
What,
post it.
what kind of skill set are you looking for?
Someone that has experience with, you know, FEMA funding, long-term recovery plans, disaster mitigation, disaster recovery, maybe somebody who's got experience with HIEMA, which is the Hawaii Emergency Management Agency, that type of writing, grant management.
Nice development.
Josh, I have one more question.
Talbesian.
We're gonna plant African tulip everywhere that we possibly can. No, so this is a long-running discussion, and maybe Matt, has better insight into the types and varieties. It gets really dicey when, I think Robert left, but, DDC and the environment, department, Board of Water Supply, all the pipes underground, what the root structure is like, what the leaf litter is like, because we get dinged, for water quality, because the leaf litter turns into what the EPA considers nearshore pollutants. And so there's a big matrix of factors that need to be sort of factored in order to get the right type in the right spot. So that's about, I'm not a tree guy, so do you have any other?
Well, Josh's comments were more so in the city's right of way, which has different requirements for clearance at planting versus like a seedling anywhere, don't care, we'll count it, right? And that's the kind of partnership we wanna learn from, like Camille Morris Lab and other folks doing up above Makakilo Forest Restoration anywhere. Those are all really important to keep counting as well. At least for the city, what does get installed and what is grown in our own nurseries. The Division of Urban Forestry continuously refines their tree list, their preferred tree list, and they coordinate with DEP where they are the ones that are actually regulating and permitting what can be planted. But a lot of it is somewhat dependent on just what's available in nursery and the kinds of requests that agencies and private industry are requesting in terms of what they think is sort of in vogue now, hopefully in vogue in the future, and then it's also consistent with the kinds of benefits that we can accrue from hopefully acclimatized, appropriate treatment. Yeah, and just a clarification on the urban areas, that's not urban Honolulu, that's more of a, if you were to think of the state urban zone. So it's really everywhere that people live on this island falls under that urban classification. So it's our communities, which is what we can cover most significantly.
Sorry, Matt, that was a dumb question, or you can sit down, but I have a question, another follow-up question on that. So within that 35% within the urban zoned area, to what extent is kind of equity in coverage being considered?
Right, so the intent is one, just to get better on our data. So we currently have a 2013 urban canopy assessment. It's not, it doesn't cover the whole island. And what we would like to do is one, update that, ensure that we have some cycle of regular data and maintenance of it. But also the findings from it should inform where we do things first through a more comprehensive urban forest master plan.
Thanks. Are the last questions or comments? Thank you. Okay, so next we're moving into our topic of building codes. We're having two speakers really talking about the two different sides of it in terms of resiliency as well as energy. So first I'd like to call up Gary Chalk, who's the president of Marksman Chalk, and we really thank you for being here today.
Sure. How should we do this? Should I stand here and do the presentation from here?
Sure. Yeah, this setup's a bit strange because then your back is to the audience, so yeah.
Sorry about that.
Wherever you feel most comfortable.
Okay, thank you for the invitation to present this information to you that was from a study that was completed last year. So it was funded by the Office of State Planning, and the idea was to look over the horizon and comprehensively look at what codes and regulations relating to building construction might be adapted or revised in the future to adjust to climate change effects. That's an overarching idea. And actually, this study was born from the State Hazard Mitigation Plan of, I think, 2013, which identified this as a high priority to do this kind of work. Okay, so a little bit about myself. Basically, that I've been involved in engineering risk analysis for natural hazards for about 30 years now, primarily in hurricane, earthquake, and tsunami hazard research. And so I've been working on these types of issues for a while, as well as building code. So as I said before, we wanted to look at codes and design related regulations. So it's a bigger concept of just the building code, but all the associated standards and regulations that affect that. The Department of Planning and Permitting was one of the primary advisory stakeholders when we were working on this project. So I want to start off with some comments I had received from stakeholders when we first got started. And I say these are choice comments because, you know, I think sometimes I sense some sort of manic depressive moods here. But you know, when for people that are volunteering to try to develop the building codes, their first comment really, you know, is very frustrating. And so one of my colleagues gave this comment, saying, well, you know, we're living in the past. We're not even at the present in terms of what we use. So how are we going to get ahead to deal with the future? And I just checked a couple of days ago. Hawaii and Texas are the states that use the oldest building codes across the whole country. And in fact, the U.S. territories have adopted building codes that are more modern than ours. Okay. On the territories, there's a problem with enforcement. Well, we have enforcement here, but our standards are really antiquated. So it's, I don't know, it's not something to take pride in at the present, but again, it's getting really sick of it, actually. And other questions were, are there any new codes that need to be created as opposed to revising existing codes? And what can be done to investigate new technology? So as the years progress, there'll be new technologies that can be applied to this, some of which we don't exactly know at the present. Okay, the objectives were very specifically written in the RFP for our study. It was actually NOAA and Office State Plan that had very specific items that they wanted to be covered. And I think basically it involved looking at feasibility, involving stakeholders, and then through that process, actually writing draft ordinances of, okay, if this ordinance needs changing or this code needs changing, how exactly would you do it? So the publication that accompanies the study has that text in there. That's sort of a draft of what might be implemented. The other thing is and I'll show you some of this later, is we included at our own volition, actually, and expense, a study of coastal inundation based on future climatology of hurricanes in the Central Pacific and sea level rise, to look at what is the difference between the present and the future in terms of storm inundation, and looking at it from a probabilistic standpoint. So that was really informative. You all know the primary effects in terms of coastal inundations, and these things all, I think, pose a combination of social engineering and economic issues that have to be rectified in order to achieve any forward progress. Because in this case, mitigation does cost money, and those things have to be designed properly to be effective. I'm trying to give you the overall approach that is formulated here, and that is that we should think about an adaptive design, which is, firstly, in order for anyone to do anything about it, they have to have some standard of what's required, what are the objectives, how do you achieve them. And if that's done in a way that's economically viable, then you wind up harnessing the power of the entire construction industry and the design industry to create the type of future infrastructure that you want. First it has to be, it has to have standard, essentially, in design and construction industry. With that, you design to the most probable and like not the worst case climate conditions. But at the same time, you incorporate the flexibility in the design to incorporate alterations to the project as information improves in the future, later in the life of that facility, to make an adaptation or renovation or improvement to that facility to bring it to what it needs to be in the future. So this basically is a recognition that there actually is high uncertainty in modeling. We can't like now know what's going to happen 100 years in the future, and we don't even know what skills and technologies will be available, but you want to get started, so you do it incrementally, such that the cost of it can be spread out over time. So this is the diagram that kind of incorporates that idea that presently there's a lot of scatter in what models might indicate, and but eventually we'll kind of know, or our descendants will know what the future holds. So initial designs would basically be designed around sort of the mean projection, and at a time when it's needed, which is basically some point here, where you see perhaps that your design is becoming obsolete with respect to environmental conditions.
It doesn't work on the screen. So
Oh, I can see this. Can't you all see this?
No.
That's interesting. I guess you're just reflecting it straight back at me. Okay, so at a certain time, it becomes evident that you need to make a change. And then you do so, and then you can progress for decades. And eventually, as your knowledge uncertainty decreases, then you wind up being where you need to be. But you don't try to take the whole economic bite initially. The analogy would be, in 100 years, there's maybe 3 generations of grandchildren that need to go to college. But none of us have the capability to send all 3 generations of grandchildren with our funds to create that college fund for all of them, right? So it has to be spread out over time.
Sorry, can I ask a quick question
Yeah.
about what the scale, so which this is referring to, like in terms of
Well,
building or regional or?
This is basically time, and I guess the vertical axis would be, say, the parameter we're looking at is, say, sea level. So, you know, basically, you would, you know, we're here now, and there's some projections that have a scatter, and the average of that, of these projections is here. So you move along with that until it becomes necessary to make a change. So you kind of, it's like sailing. To get a mark, you tack to it, right? And you make changes in your path along the way to account for conditions that change on your way to the mark. Okay, so I wanted to talk about the specific changes that can be implemented. Most of them actually very soon, or if not now. I'm going to just talk about the things that can be done at the city level. There's a whole bunch of them that would occur at the state level. The first one was, this is sort of like getting out of the past into the present before you get to the future, and that is for power reliability, we need a reliable transmission and distribution system. So we have a legacy of standards for wind-resistant designs to hurricanes that kind of left us in a highly vulnerable position because for about 40 years we had a power pole standard that essentially would not rate out for hurricanes. It would rate out to about 60 miles an hour, after which failure would be anticipated. So that's basically why Hawaii got its power system that's so devastated and unique. So in 2007, the PUC decided, well, it's time to change this, and they adopted a standard which is now 15 years old. And furthermore, it adopted a national standard and did not account for the effect of topography on wind speed in amplifying and heightening the force of the hurricane in rugged terrain. So those things should be done past due with making that type of change. I think the basic issue here is that PUC is basically a business regulation commission. You know, they're deciding big questions like, okay, are we gonna let Florida take over ECO and that kind of thing? So updating the technical standards is like hardly on their docket, but it needs to be somehow, it needs to be done to within 3 years, there are changes that can be done to, at the building code level, to address rainfall intensification, and require flood regulations that include relative sea level change. You can also include consideration of about 50 years of shoreline erosion with respect to site planning and foundation design. And it could also require the placement of critical equipment. This is basically equipment necessary for the function of important facilities during and after a disaster to be raised above the 500-year flood elevation. So these things that could be implemented within 3 years, associated with that, we want to create a 500-year flood zone that are applicable to these structures and facilities that are of higher importance, that are facilities that are key to the functioning of the community and utility services and the like.
Is this like how Sand Island in Hurricane Anna 2014, I remember all of their electricity was in the basement and it was totally flooded.
There are a lot of buildings.
Like that. This is kind of in that same
Yeah,
similar
yeah.
story. I just remember they were like underwater for under 12 feet of like
Yeah.
wastewater for like in the dark
Yeah.
for many hours. Okay.
In the intermediate term, then you can start to accommodate long-term shoreline erosion in terms of setbacks. So this is I think fairly controversial because I think the issue is shallow lots where if a structure is damaged by a storm and you have to rebuild, then we may be in a situation where there's not enough left of the lot that we can build on to restore the residents. So, but anyway, shoreline erosion is it has been going on for a long time, and it's sort of a fact of life. So, I think we would need a regulatory map. Since it's going to be controversial, it should have an independent peer review, and then it would need to be updated probably about every 50 years, I would think. Again, intermediate term. This is about making a change to Chapter 25, which is the special management area. And actually this idea, which it came out of DPP, which is you would create what they would call a coastal construction zone, and which is a subset of the SMA zone. Because some of the SMA zone includes properties that aren't as coastal as they may be included because of view planes and things of that nature. But anyway, for major developments of a certain size, you know, say about 75,000 square feet or greater, then the SMA permit would have to explain how that development will enable the adaptation to sea level rise and shoreline retreat. So that would take place either we're going to do the following now, or our design is such that we know when this happens, we can be renovated because it's configured properly to make this adjustment to account for that rise. So it without, but essentially it puts the issue, it gives it standing, and it becomes a requirement. And so creative people involved in design can look at that on a site-specific basis and determine what can be done now and what can be done later. Basically, you just don't have approve something where you're painted in a corner where, okay, it's approved, but there's no means for making this adaptation. So again, it's about doing some things now and making sure that you can do something later to account for changing conditions. And that would be a process where if you're in the SMA, you need to address that specifically, and that would be the basis of the design that is approved. We did a pilot study to look at what a future coastal flooding zone might entail. So what we did was we worked with Kerry Emanuel of MIT and Park Chung of UH SOAS. Together we essentially created a hurricane catalog representative of end of the century climate. And this was essentially something that Kerry worked on. And from that we did a probabilistic analysis to determine the representative storms that would generate the equivalent of 500-year storms at that point in the future, at the end of the century. And then we did fairly sophisticated inundation modeling through Park Chung to look at what that what that flooding would exhibit. And so we did it for the urban core, Waikiki, Kaka'ako area, and just a couple of graphics. So we are assuming end of the century representative carbon pathway 8.5. So instead of the generally, okay, we're not going to do too much, and it's just going to happen. So we picked that scenario for this end of the century simulation, and so what we're showing is the flooding that includes both the end of the century storm intensification as well as sea level rise from the top. So here you can see the delta between with and without consideration of sea level rise. I think the bottom figures are particularly instructive because it's showing, and it shows up in the modeling, which was essentially a time history simulation of the storm, including all the wave action, that the principal flooding occurs out from the Alawai. It doesn't actually occur through overwash of Waikiki. So that Alawai Canal is sort of the weak point in the whole system for flooding.
Sorry, does this take into account inundation up through manholes and things like that?
No, it's not that sophisticated. But I think it captures the principal effects because it is a time history simulation where it's actually including wave setup and run up, not only individual waves in that storm scenario.
Where was the landfall of the eye in this?
I didn't bring that pathway, but that path of the storm, but it's basically, through here.
So
Like
this
direct
is-
strike through.
Yeah,
along.
it's a.
This is the worst case
Yeah,
scenario.
yeah. Well, it's not the worst case, but
Right.
it, yeah. So the change we found was our losses increased by almost 500%, and with both of these, that's the big delta. But both of these really relate to whether the model includes the sea level rise or not. And it makes a big difference. We actually have plotted the individual parcels and the flood depths. So I think a lot of this relates to, again, the key role of the IOI as a vulnerability point in the whole system. And, there are many thousands of properties that, could be spared from flooding if there's some flood control measure at IOI. If we start thinking like the Netherlands in terms of, trying to prevent that scenario from occurring.
What category storm was it?
I think it was a 4.
And what would it have been without global warming? Something like, do you know?
I could trace it back to.
Just touching it.
Yeah.
That's all right.
We have the data, it's just I don't, have the details of that.
Gary, just to confirm, that's 3.6 billion, not.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I don't even know what that number is.
Yeah.
3.6 trillion is my.
Not a comma.
Okay.
3.6, okay. That's bad enough. So, at least for the urban core, it appears that government actually should be working towards some measure of coastal defense, because not doing that means essentially that these other thousands of properties, somewhat become unviable. And no matter what you tell the people that you would have to do something to accommodate this, there's not really much an individual property owner can do versus what the city could do for the state. So the Corps of Engineers is talking about raising the levee height along the ROI, and I guess like a lot of people scream and moan about it because they probably have this idea that, okay, we're gonna build a wall, and this is from Andrew Tang, actually, I borrowed it, but we're gonna build a wall, and therefore hundreds of homeless people can be on the other side of the wall. They'll take over the ROI and it'll be horrible, right? So, but that's because you're not thinking like a designer, a creative designer with, someone like Andrew is thinking along these lines. Okay, this is what we have now, but if we raise this and have a slope to it, we create a public space that's a lot nicer. We can include relocation of infrastructure into that built-up area and create a major improvement to what we have now, which is you're walking along and basically cars are screaming by and everything. It's not actually that pleasant, but it can get a lot better. And so I think really these types of public works have to be informed by creative designers, working with engineers to get something that people would support. So I think, in terms of maintaining the economy and maintaining the ability to recover after disasters, there's a key role that infrastructure and critical facilities have. Those are under the purview of the government rather than the private sector, and so I think a part of this really is what should city and state government be doing to plan forward to achieve some measure of adaptation that's defensive in nature. So there are three key places I think you're probably familiar with this, like Pier 1 Honolulu Harbor handles all international shipping. Kewalo Basin is sort of a weak point to the flooding of Kalakaua in many respects. The airport reef runway, Sand Island access, all-wide flood control, and like these are all assets that exist now. They're among the first to be affected. So planning should start to be invigorated to determine what's going to be done about this while we have the available time. So the last bullet is my personal interjection on this, that it probably takes about 10 years of sort of a think tank to develop these ideas, hopefully trying to be isolated from what I call political gamemanship. Sometimes if you get a champion, then you get an enemy at the same time in terms of the political dialogue. So I would think maybe people could set that aside for a while and let some creative people work on these problems. The other thing I think would be useful to do is to look at, in the case of rainfall intensification, do we need to adjust our stormwater standards? As we have greater, we're gonna have greater rainfall, we have more urbanization, and I think the urbanization effect is not really, wasn't really considered in the development of these standards. So maybe it's the time to just take an overarching look at it and determine, okay, what rate of failure is acceptable? How often are you gonna let certain communities flood and so forth? I think, the general public may have the impression that it's not too good, that they're being flooded too often. But I think, actually, when I look at flood data, many times the people that are flooded are in structures that are so-called pre-firm. They were built to standards before the implementation of flood insurance requirements. So it's sort of built into what we have, that these types of communities are gonna be more susceptible to flooding, because they're just built before the time when elevation and raising the structure were required. But nevertheless, probably would be a good thing to do this. So the recommendation is basically, think about adopting a fiscally low regret adaptive strategy. The idea is include or require to be included in the planning of facilities the flexibility to accommodate future modifications. We do this in the building industry all the time. There's very few buildings that we build like this year that won't need some kind of major renovation 20, 30 years from now, for various reasons. So this is just another type of adaptation that should be built into how you design a facility initially. So the advantage of that is that you're not asking the current generation to pay 100 years of climate change in one fell swoop. You're asking each generation to do their contribution to keep what you're building in your community along the mean path towards where you want to be. That's the basic idea. All these measures are included in this particular study that is available from the Office of Planning, which was completed in the fall of 2017. So it has some very specific language and discussion about feasibility and so forth. So that's the end of my presentation. I'll leave you with this thought. And if you have any questions.
Thank you so much. I'm sure we do have lots of questions. Here, why don't you have a seat? Yep. Questions or comments from the commissioners first?
I have a question. First of all, thank you very much for the work that you do.
Sure.
I read the first draft of the report that you're referencing here from 2015, and it felt as if you were a bit ahead of everybody else with your recommendations, so much appreciated.
Thank you.
What I liked in that report is that you look at the individual codes and you identify the shortcomings, and you have recommendations on how we could make amendments. The land use ordinance, the LUO, is currently going through an update. And as you pointed out at the beginning, we are not known for changing our codes often. So this is a fantastic opportunity. I have the architectural draft recommendations here. I read them, and in regards to resiliency and sustainability, they are actually deferring to other rules.
I see.
I think this It's just a personal opinion, and I suspect it doesn't stay in this room, but I think that's a big mistake. Are you involved in updating this document?
I'm not.
Would you like to be?
Well, if there's an opportunity to do what I can, you know, this idea came about during the course of this study I was engaged in, and the people at DPP at the time kind of had the viewpoint that you're seeing, that okay, we should not have the LUO take up this issue, and it should be referenced to other regulations. But I think the LUO is so prominent in terms of project planning that I can see it existing within that as well. It's just a, you know, so I wouldn't be opposed to, although it's not a part of our report in terms of making these types of changes, but there's certain things that we have included in other ordinances that could be essentially either made consistent with or transferred into the LUO.
I will reach out to you for feedback. Thank you.
Sure.
Other questions?
Yeah. Was rainfall included in your hurricane model?
This does not include the rainfall during that storm. It's basically coastal inundation.
So it's storm surge.
Yeah. Now, when we got the simulated database from Kerry Manual, and it basically is a representation of like 50 repeats of the 20-year period at the end of the century to create a very big catalog of simulated storms, to sort of create the statistical mass you need to do the analysis. But it does show rainfall intensification, and it does show sort of a shift in terms of storm intensity. Maybe the average number of storms being sort of the same, but sort of a shift towards higher intensity storms on the tail end of the probabilities. And that's incorporated in the scenario, but it wasn't a combination of that with the rainfall.
And the water level assumptions, the water level scenario was 60 centimeters of sea level rise. And then there was 30 centimeters or 33 centimeters. What was that? It was 0.6 meters plus 0.3.
Oh, okay, so it's basically
What was the 0.3?
Mean high water plus
0.6. Oh, so the 0.3 was the above mean sea level.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you described the need for coastal defense. Have you come up with any sort of cost?
No, I mean, I think this is
assessment?
why you need a group to study these
Right.
in terms of what it would take. You know, I think a lot of people have looked at the examples that the Netherlands has accomplished in, you know, past 50, 60 years. It was amazing to me when they mentioned the cost of some of these mega projects. Okay, they're expensive, but they're not like out of reach. You know, I was thinking at one point they mentioned these, you know, to protect Rotterdam. There's these two huge
Yeah.
flood control operable dams that come into play, and they're mentioning something like $150 million on that order.
Mhm.
And I was thinking, oh, gee, we pour more than that than in a couple of high-rise condominiums when we build them. You know, it's not an insurmountable amount of money to do some of these things.
Also, your approach here is to adapt in place rather than to retreat.
I think there are certain key resources where you're going to want to defend, and there may other be places where you would retreat. But the key is protecting the key resources and economic assets of the city. What you do in other places like, say, whatever, Ka'ava or North Shore or whatever, is a specific problem to that locality that is almost like, I think, a separate problem when it comes to just say, do we allow this residence to be here, or is it just gonna eventually, is that property eventually be lost versus,
Right.
you know, what the other assets that we have that are, you know, you need a healthy, viable economy to produce the resources that you need to do the climate adaptation. So you need to have a healthy economy in order to achieve anything in terms of improvement.
Did you guys consider any new revenue sources or any specific revenue sources for?
That was sort of beyond the scope of the study.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what's the status of the report now? Is it just sort of sitting on the shelf?
Yeah. But, you know, which is why I really wanted to come before this
Yeah.
group and sort of try to give it some life.
Can we get a copy of your PowerPoint?
Oh, absolutely, sure. I mean, essentially you have it already, so.
Great.
I do have another question. In your report, you referred to the local amendments to the ABC in regards to, hurricanes and flood protective measures. And you make a statement that we currently, under the current code, we are designing up to 130 miles an hour, which is actually not totally correct because, and I'm only pointing it out because it's actually less. It's like 110, something like that, except if they are risk categories 3 and 4. So with that in mind, 2 questions. One might be a little bit unfair, and that is, what would you recommend we design to? Based on, especially what just happened in Florida, the wind speeds were, actually I don't know what the wind speeds were.
155.
And it wouldn't, no matter what we, I mean, we just finished it's almost finished a higher risk category facility for the city that is designed to 156, which is actually kind of funny now. What should we design to? And then the next question is, how do we pay for that?
Okay, well, in terms of wind speed, and, you know, I'm coming from a framework of what are the probabilities of certain hazards, right? So when we did our study, we looked at, and we did the analysis of the simulated storm climate towards the end of the century. You know, we do see some intensification, but we found that the delta in that wind speed was not sufficient to make a change right now. If you use the code with respect to its calibration on the importance of the facility in the risk category, you wind up ratcheting up as you need to for the facilities that really need to be functional during and after the disaster. In that framework, I'm thinking about those types of structures, which I think are the primary candidates for this type of approach. When we talk about single-family homes and so forth, that's almost like a whole another universe in terms of design and construction, and I think they really need to be separately considered because the resilience of housing stock, and particularly the legacy housing stock, is not that great. And the way it's set up now is essentially they're designed to somewhat lesser standard than the rest of the building population. But I think that's sort of a different issue in terms of making that adjustment. I think the other thing is, when I was thinking about this, you know, we were involved in the study that was used to determine the design wind speeds for Hawaii. This was in the 1990s, I'm sorry, early 2000. The models that were used at that time didn't account for the possibility that you have favorable wind shear. So it was based on storm seeding tracking and sea surface temperatures and that sort of thing. But it didn't, those models didn't include the probability of having sufficient wind shear to delay the storm. So, you know, if in events like Lane and so forth, if the world had behaved like the theory, we would have gotten hit. But there's a certain bit of favorable conditions we sometimes have that gives us a break. And so that's sort of not, it's not baked into what we designed to. What we designed to sort of assumes that effect isn't there.
We were very lucky.
Oh, yeah, yeah. On November 3rd, Saturday, we're gonna have a public workshop, on the hazard mitigation plan, where we're gonna present results of what would have happened if Hurricane Lane had made landfall. We've been working on sort of the loss calculations for that scenario.
November 3rd?
Yes, it's gonna be at the Blaisdell Center, and it's gonna be a sort of a half-day session. Geared not solely to climate change, but just the hazard mitigation plan itself, of which hurricanes is a major contributor.
Could you talk for a second about how, what Josh brought up earlier, how the hazard mitigation plan update is going to incorporate climate change? Can you sort of frame that?
Well, we will have a dedicated section of the plan devoted to it that will tie into the other hazards that it affects. And so, you know, I think it'll be the first hazard mitigation plan in Hawaii that does do that specifically. And obviously, Josh's office has the standing with the city in that regard, so we certainly intend to work very closely with his office and how the plan incorporates that consideration.
Other last questions or comments?
Just thanks again for that talk. It was really, really well done, really interesting. I really enjoyed the specificity of the recommendations. But I was wondering if you knew of any other states or cities where you would say the building codes have incorporated these types of, or are starting to incorporate these types of efforts.
I'm not aware of any. I think a lot of movement is happening with respect to sort of reducing carbon footprint or carbon production. Perhaps not so much in designing construction, except for, you know, there's other things that we do in terms of waste management and so forth that are meant to address that indirectly, but in terms of basically just designing for the anticipated future effects, I don't think so. But at the American Society of Civil Engineers, this idea is gaining a lot of traction. So the idea, you know, what we used to do before was assume, okay, we sort of know the probability of bad things happening now through a lot of work. Yeah, but now the idea is, well, those hazards are not stationary with time. So what we're saying is stationarity is dead. Things are going to change. So within the time frame of your facility, you need to be able to exist within that changing environment.
I do have one last question, and you just made me think of that. The State Building Code Council is a voluntary effort. Is that still correct? It used to be.
It's manned by volunteers, and Howard is actually our current chair, so you could also put him on the hot seat when he steps up.
Well, I would not put anybody on the hot seat that serves on that. But if we wanted to move this forward, and I guess that's what I'm saying here, then, and if this was important, to us, then wouldn't we, make this a paid, effort?
Well, there was that idea. Of course, many of these things do have a road of implementation that passes through the State Building Code Council. Not all of them, but many of them would. But I think what's really needed is really more proactive support from the state. And it's been frankly sort of a, okay, you guys are volunteers, you can do whatever you want and you can use this room, but let us know what you're doing, but it's all up to you. So I think a little bit more active support, especially from the governor, would be very helpful. Because what I fear is that with volunteers, that they're continually, the volunteers do a very good job of working the process to get the technical amendments that are necessary for a new code. And we've done it several times, and then it basically, in many instances, the state would essentially just sit on it, and so, there was a code that we worked on which they didn't adopt. So, I was involved in developing the State Building Code statute in 2007. At the time, we were naive. We thought that if there was a change to state law, state government would obey it. But it turns out sometimes it's what people feel like abiding rather than what they should be abiding to. So I think that's where we are today in terms of why we're so behind, frankly.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate
Sure.
your time, and that was great. Yeah,
You're
very much
welcome.
appreciate a copy of it. So thank you.
Okay.
Next, we're Howard Wigg, who, as we just heard, is the chair of the State Building Code Council. He's also an energy analyst at DBED, and will be presenting on the tropical energy code. Thank you.
Let me move my seat up here so everybody can see me. First, I've been with the State Energy Office for longer than some people have been on this planet. And I've been with energy codes for the last 24 years. And I've had a colleague here, she seems to have disappeared, Gail Suzuki-Jones. And some word about Gary, he doesn't just sit at his computer and do these highfalutin diagnoses. There was a major tsunami off of Chile some years ago, about 12 years ago, and Gary, being internationally respected, was sent to Chile to examine the after effects of the huge tsunami that came ashore. And what they found was, and you can correct me, Gary, if I get this wrong, it makes a good story in any case, this mountain of water came onto the plains and then went up a hill, accumulated on the hill, and came gushing back such that fish warehouses along the coast were pushed not inland but towards the sea because of the enormous backlash of the water. Is that a good summary? Not really. Okay.
Well, it's certainly appropriate for the type of disaster a tsunami entails.
Yeah. Well, here's another Gary story then. I was going through some engineering literature and found a photo of an apartment building about 12 stories high in an obviously wet area lying on its side. So I forwarded that to Gary and said, "What's going on?" He said, "This is from China, and the contractor, instead of putting down industrial strength pillars to stabilize the building, put down pillars intended to stabilize telephone poles. And the result was predictable. The contractor wanted to save a bit of money. Does that ring a bell, Gary?
Yeah, I remember that failure.
Yeah.
The piles were hollow, actually.
So the tie-in here is that the contractor wanted to save a bit of money, and whenever you propose new things to a code, being it structural code, energy code, you're going to get pushback. I learned that 24 years ago, and I've experienced it many, many, many times. The builders, especially residential builders, want to keep costs down at all possible costs. And they argue that if you raise the cost of a home, the first-time home buyers, the poor young couple with their little kids, will not be able to buy their first home. And sometimes they win that argument. And as you attempt to strengthen the codes, that's exactly what you're going to run into. There's a disconnect between the builder who wants to deliver a good home for the least cost and the homeowner who wants a high-quality home with very low energy costs, so he's better able to pay off his mortgages. But that argument doesn't sit well with the builders. Oh, let's see, I should be, I just calculated somehow that I've spent maybe 90% of my life in a radius 4 miles that way and 8 miles that way. I don't know what brought on that. Okay, energy codes are the single most important step in tackling climate change. This is from the executive of the International Energy Agency, and the EU has gotten this message, Japan has gotten this message, Australia, so forth, and as we all know, Honolulu is part of the Paris Climate Accord. And the reason for this is that it's a really dramatic way of reducing the fossil fuel used to produce electricity to power homes and buildings. Less fossil fuel burning, less greenhouse gas. Oh, energy codes. When you're building a building, you build to plumbing, seismic code, electrical, and then there's energy. And the function of the energy code is to render the home or the building as energy efficient as possible in a cost-effective manner while maintaining health and safety. That's the international level. Steve Chu, I had the pleasure of meeting him. We can reduce energy use by 33%. And the savings of an energy code are exponential. You build an efficient building in year 1, and say you're projecting out for 20 years, that savings in year 1 is going to extend for 20 years. But there's more. In year 2, those savings are still going on, and you're going to extend for 19 years. Year 3, you're going to extend for 18 years. There's an exponential growth in savings. And once you have this efficient equipment in place, or the envelope in place, you don't have to feed it with any new fuel. It's just sitting there saving year after year after year. I call it the gift that keeps on going, giving. And then at the state level, we are one of the leaders in energy code, well, not in energy codes, but energy efforts. We haven't quite gotten there yet. And that 14 billion, one of our advocates got a little enthusiastic and slipped a decimal there, and I didn't catch it until just now. That should be 1.4 billion. That is still $1,000 for every man, woman, and child in the state. And one of the magic parts of an energy code is we first meet at a national level. There's 300-400 of us in a great big auditorium, and among the people there are manufacturers' reps, because you need to manufacture all this building stuff. And let's just say windows. We come up with the fact that the new code shall have high performance windows. And the rep dashes back to his boss and says, boss, from now on, or the new energy code, when it kicks in, is going to have these high efficiency windows. And boss says, whoops, well, let's start manufacturing them in mass. And the magic of mass production kicks in. What had been kind of an expensive, exotic window suddenly becomes mainstream. And then what happens? this is what the factory's producing anyway. It goes into the hardware stores and the big boxes, and Mr. Homeowner who wants to replace a window, oh, there's an energy efficient window there waiting for him. This is called market transformation. I once toured a glass production factory, and the manufacturing of high-performance windows is pretty exotic. You spatter tiny little beads of silver inside the window, and I asked the tour guide, what would happen if I wanted just a single pane of glass, the glass that we grew up with? And he said, oh, I'd have to special order that. That would be very expensive. That is the magic of mass production and in energy codes. Am I going too fast? Anybody questions so far? Okay. This is Hawaii's Renewable Portfolio Standard. I never understood why we don't call it something more illustrative, but that's what it is. And we have different years here, and this measures the given or anticipated degree to which we will have clean energy. And a lot of this is driven by the institution of energy codes. And we at the Energy Office and at the Building Code Council work in tandem with renewable energy, and specifically just one Building Code Council meeting ago, we adopted the 2017 National Electrical Code. Sounds pretty boring? No, it's very exciting because in that code are 4 provisions dealing with energy storage. As you know, we are pretty well PV'd out, photovoltaic out here in Hawaii, such that on a sunny day like today, the PVs are producing so much energy that the power plants can't back off sufficiently to accommodate all that energy, so there's some waste. Bingo, what happens if we put that excess energy into storage? And then, is everybody familiar with the duck curve? Some are. That's where you measure the demand for electricity. Morning, it's pretty stable over here. Get into the sunny part of the day, and the demand for production electricity dips down, but then comes the sunset, and the sun sets at exactly the time when everybody's going home from schools, offices, and this being a tourist economy, all the tourists are coming back to their hotels, laying up the hotels, hot showers, getting into restaurants, so you have an abnormal evening peak, which normally is called the duck curve, but I run a program called Code Green, and Josh Powell, the head of one of the major energy PV companies, was my guest, and he said, no, it's more like a Nessie curve, as in Loch Ness Monster, with that great big long neck. So the idea is that now that we have the National Electrical Code, we can store, and shave that evening peak. And the approval of applications for storage should be much easier now that all the storage people have to say is, I am in compliance with the 2017 National Energy Code. So it's a combination of energy efficiency and renewables. Any questions about that? Now getting specifically to energy codes, we start over at, what is that, 1975. There's barely anything going on, and all the different dates are subsequent iterations of commercial and residential energy codes. And then you see towards the right some big dips, and those were the halcyon days of us energy code advocates. When you go to these national meetings, you have government types and others who are pushing for maximum efficiency, and you have the builders, developers, and other people opposed to it, and you face off and have these huge debates. And on those 2 years, we, the good guys, won. I am friends with actually the 2 major proponents of representatives of the building industry, and I remember once 2 of them were walking like deers in headlights and say, what happened? Because we, good guys, won there. And here are the projections. Oh, bless you.
Thank you.
well, takes the tail end of the previous slide and then projects out into the future where you're combining the efficiency with renewable energies and getting pretty gosh darn close to zero net energy for the whole state. And yeah, we called it the 50% solution because in a whole bunch of these national codes, we just drove it down, 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 down. And specifically, one of the accomplishments nationally was the establishment of a whole new climate zone called the tropical climate zone, which is essentially Hawaii. And that gave us carte blanche to design and put into codes what we call the tropical home, which I'll describe in a couple of slides there. And the Building Code Council, which Bettina mentioned, formed 2007. One of the provisions of the law that formed us was there shall be created a position of administrative assistant, and he or she shall have a salary, and therefore there will be allotted a sum of blank. All these years, that blank has remained blank. The state hasn't given us a penny, and a lot of people, especially like Gary's got to earn a living too. He's a private sector guy, and he has put in so many hours into developing the structural and the wind maps and so forth. So without an administrative assistant, we got behind. I should mention, although that we're very recalcitrant in the energy code, that the ACEEE, American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, came out recently with a state-by-state analysis, and we come in at number 6, Hawaii. And when we passed the new energy code, I did a little calculation. I think we're going to jump to number 5. Questions so far?
Who's ahead of us?
Hmm?
Who is ahead of us?
Number 1, California, number 2, Massachusetts, number 3, Rhode Island, number 4, Connecticut, number 5, New York. So we're in good company. We're just about tied with Oregon and Washington, 2 other very green states. So what have we done in Hawaii compared to that? I forgot my show and tell here, way down here. Oops. Oh, here. It's always good to show you something real. This is our current Bible to be 2015 IECC, and it is a state code now, but the counties still have this. Does this look beat up and battered? Yes, it is a beat up and battered code. And the difference between the two is enormous. So significant changes between this and what Hawaii has done. We've put in several really good amendments. The states are free to take the national code and amend. And one of the big bugaboos in enforcing any code is commissioning. It's on the plans, it all looks very nice, but did the contractor install the requisite materials or the requisite energy using items, and then did the electricians, plumbers, whoever actually install properly? Answer, no, it doesn't always happen. The job of a commissioner is to go in after the fact or even during construction for high rises and make sure, look at the plans and make sure that everything is being installed as specified, and then once the equipment is working, to test the equipment. And the equipment, there's interfaces between different pieces of equipment now, and it gets pretty complex, and it's easy to go wrong. And we've shown savings of as much as 15%, even 20% on a commissioned building versus a non-commissioned building. So Hawaii is pushing very, very hard on that. In the new code, lighting requirements are really complex. You have to have not just a manual switch, but a motion sensor, and you have to have a dimming sensor, and you have to have a zoning sensor, and then you have to have daylighting. And I am the major proponent of daylighting. Daylighting is when you have windows, and unlike this, you actually let the light in, and you measure how far on a sunny day the light will come in, and the lighting fixtures that are affected by that daylight have sensors, and they automatically go off. And then when there's not adequate light, the fixtures come back on again. And daylighting has all kinds of good health implications. You give kids good views of the outdoors in classrooms, and their test scores go up very, very measurably. So I love daylighting, but I've had electrical engineers saying this is complicated as all get out, Howard. So I've done other studies or looked at studies, and it's shown that if you just reduce what's called the lighting power density, you're allowed X number of watts per square foot in a given space. If you just reduce that, you have achieved more than all of these controls that I just mentioned. But how can we reduce lighting power density? Answer. I helped create this 5 years ago. LEDs were, the standard was around 90 lumens per watt. That's miles per gallon in lighting. Now we're easily up to 120 lumens per watt. One manufacturer just came out with diodes that yield 155 lumens per watt. The technology is improving very, very, very rapidly. There's something called Haight's Law, which is equivalent to Moore's Law, and it's coming true. So just like that, we can improve efficiency and lower lighting power density by 33%. The design of fixtures is now specifically for LEDs. These lights give 360 degree light output, meaning a lot of it goes up, you don't need it, so you have a reflective surface out there to get it back down, but in the process you lose up to 70% of your lumens coming down onto the task. With LEDs, that is not necessary. You can get the light down where you want it. So given those combinations, you can just take the lighting power density specified in this, multiply by 0.6, and that is how many watts you have in the space, and you've got perfectly adequate light down on the task. And another big improvement is it's not just Kauai now. Honolulu and Maui are following suit. The code here says if you're going to re-roof a home or a building and you find no insulation in the old roof, you have to insulate like heck, including insulating the interior. I've worked with the Hawaii Roofing Association. They said, Howard, that's going to double the cost of re-roofing. That's not acceptable. So we have options to have in radiant barriers, reflective roofs, and ventilation, either ridge ventilation or solar fan ventilation. And that does just as good a job for a fraction of the cost. Another amendment in Hawaii is submetering. That is, well, you know what submetering is, and this is very vague on submetering. So we say if there's 1,000 square feet of tenant space, it must be submetered and the tenant must have access to that space. And that he might then be paying his actual bills. What a concept. And that will automatically, study after study has shown, lower the cost of energy use. That's commercial, residential, tropical climate zone. I'll describe that in a minute. There's high efficacy lighting, namely LEDs, is increased, and this code requires R13 in floors. R standing for resistance, that's insulation, and the average cost of floor insulation mainland is about $1.40 a square foot, 2,000 square feet of floor space, $2,800. That's mainland costs. I'll add to that. How much insulation do we need in Hawaii's floors? Not a whole heck of a lot. Minnesota, your delta T, outdoors, indoors, could be easily 50, 60 degrees. What is it in Hawaii, 5 degrees? If you're cold on a winter morning, you put on fuzzy slippers or have a throw rug down there. There's your insulation at great savings. And we emphasize this cost savings because there's less pushback from the builders. And the tropical code offers a points option. You get credit for this and credit for that, and it gives much better flexibility to the builder. And I should explain that you can either follow this code, which assumes central air conditioning, and out on the Eva Plains, virtually all the homes are centrally air conditioned, or you can do the tropical code, which requires either little or no air conditioning, and the requirements all through there are much, much easier, much cheaper, and what's encouraged also is a large free vent area relative to floor space, and that means a heck of a lot of openable window space to get the flow through of trade winds. And maybe I've got it in the next slide. Nope. Ceiling fans. Ceiling fans are mandatory. Why? Because we're going to have Kona weather days, and you're going to be gosh darned uncomfortable. Ceiling fans at high speed can reduce your perceived body temperature by 12 degrees. And ceiling fans use anywhere from 1/20th to 1/50th as much energy as air conditioning does. Questions so far? I'm moving quickly.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
How are the code updates applied, I mean, obviously to new buildings, but how are they applied to retrofits? if at all?
Okay. When a given area of a existing home or existing building is, say, redone, let's say you're in a commercial building and the new tenant wants an entirely new lighting system. The old system is torn out. That new lighting system must be compliant. Or if you put a new HVAC system in, that HVAC system must be compliant. It's only the technology or the area affected.
Okay.
Question,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so like these monster home constructions,
Yes.
they're all like falling into this compliance, or, you know,
That's a,
consulted with them, this is a whole nother problem?
that's what's called a zoning problem. And thank goodness I'm not involved in it, yeah. Commercial buildings, savings 33 to 40%. Residential buildings, I think that $12,600 figure is very low. I talked to the person who authored it, and she gave me this great, big, complex formula that she follows. And each time she injects another element into the formula, your savings go down. But anyway, there's a lot of savings to be had. And tropical zone, I've already described that pretty well. And I'll do some more, yeah, very important, mandatory reflective roofs for new construction, both commercial and, if appropriate, in residential. This is one area that I really pushed for at the national level. And climate zones 1, 2, 3, that's us up to about the middle of the deep south. Any new flat roof must have a high reflectance. And I'll be dealing with more reflectance in a minute there. And again, optional, you can either do conventional, follow this, or the tropical. And the tropical emphasizes shading a whole heck of a lot. And we've had some hot days recently, and I'm sure you've been walking down the sidewalk and getting direct solar radiation, and then you get under a tree. Oh, that feels good. Yeah. That feels good to the extent of like 40 degrees. So we emphasize shading in the tropical code. If you put a great big lanai over, say, one side of a home, the windows and the walls under that lanai, you can do anything you want. No code requirements whatsoever. Single wall construction, whatever. Oh, here's my beloved cool roof provision. And there are specifications as to the degree of cool roofness, reflectivity, and I talked to the Cool Roof Rating Council people, and they confessed to me that they haven't updated the specifications. They say 0.75 initial, 0.55 extended reflectivity. I happen to know personally, because I deal with the guys, you can get up to 0.90 reflectivity, extended 0.80. So when we get to the 20.
You do this on any pitch?
Flat roofs, it's a 1 in 12 pitch. 1 degree of slope for every foot of.
So you can avoid shingles altogether, you can just go
Yeah,
with
yeah.
painted on.
Yeah. For steep
Ceiling.
roofs, especially residential, there's a lot of argument against white. So there's something, especially for shingles, called the Energy Star shingles. And the highest they've got there is 0.26 reflectivity, and the tropical code specifies that. And that's not much, but there's not a whole heck of a lot you can do. There are 0.42 shingles, but they have about a 20% cost premium, and we're always looking after costs.
Why are residential ratings against the white roofs?
Oh, because they're generally steep. You can see them from the road, and a lot of people object strongly to high reflective roofs. Just ask a builder and he'll give you a withering look. Yeah. So you need to go. Energy codes are 10% technical, 90% political. I think Gary knows exactly what I'm talking about here. When you encounter strong forces, you just have to go along with them. You have to compromise. I know compromise is kind of unknown in this country right now, but that's what we do. Oh, titanium dioxide, I want to be down in history as the proponent of titanium dioxide. That is a very common mineral that is the key element of sunscreen, and it's also the key element of reflective coatings. And I think I've got another slide there. Yeah, the genius of it is it's tiny, tiny particles. You mix it with an existing roof coating or existing paint, and it floats in, and it lightens the surface of this paint very, very little, almost indiscernibly. But when the radiant heat penetrates into the coating, it hits the titanium dioxide particles and reflects back through the coating and into the atmosphere. This is one reason. I hope I have a cool walls slide here. So tropical ideal. The ideal would be to, and it's encouraged by the code, have a smaller interior space, a larger exterior space, i.e. lanais and overhangs for your washer, dryer, and so forth. And you just spend a whole lot more time outdoors on the lanai. Energy Star appliances, PV, so that's solar water heating, good cross ventilation. And those of you who were born and raised in this state as little kids, you recognize that. Oh, that's the home I grew up in. We're the only state in the nation that not just tolerates but encourages the use of jalousie windows. And they're not tolerated on the mainland because they have air leakage, and air leakage on the mainland is a no-no, but here it's a yes. And here's an ideal tropical code structure, a lot of outdoor overhang with relatively little interior space. And lo and behold, they're being built on the Big Island. And again, if you're local, you say, that looks like a plantation house, just an elaborate one. That's exactly what it is. And this is Kaupuni development out in Waianae, and it incorporates virtually everything that I was talking about, including the PVs, photovoltaics on the roof. They are virtually zero net energy. Actually, they've done a follow-up study on this, very, very interesting. Some people, it's a development, so you have different families in there. Some people have achieved zero net energy, and some people are real energy consumers, and it all depends on their lifestyle. And behavior is something that we have a heck of a time controlling. I'm sure everybody in this room, especially with kids, can identify with that. And we reduce the cost, no air conditioning, very little insulation when you're shading. SHGC is solar heat gain coefficient. You measure the performance of windows, no enclosed garage, And now how does all this relate to climate change? Your emissions go down, 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 down. And as the codes get more and more efficient, the emissions are going to go down even further. And I should mention that there's 3 individuals in this room, Rocky, John or Mike back there, who's on contract, and Josh. We're working on the Honolulu code very, very, very effectively. We probably communicate with one another more than 5 times a week. So they're coming along, and we're going to have a beautiful, beautiful code to present very, very shortly. I think that does me. Yep, that's me. Oh, I seen Mr. Fletcher. I'm also president of the Engineers and Architects of Hawaii, and we're meeting at lunch this Friday, and our presenter will be Dr. Fletcher, if anybody hasn't seen his
Really,
presentation.
I'm not sure I
yet.
have that on my schedule.
It'll be at the Foreign Trade Zone if you want the details. Yeah, I understand it's something of a horror show. I haven't seen it yet myself. So, questions?
That's a new description, I like that.
Thank you, Howard,
Tina,
that was
yeah.
great. Other questions from the commission?
I have a question. How far away do you think we are from a net zero mandate for, let's say, government buildings or for some institutions like, let's say, university?
Good question. Will be the IECC National Committee will be meeting early next year in a place yet to be determined, at a date yet to be determined. But a lot of us good guys are going to propose making a major leap toward zero net energy, and that's just 2021. It takes a couple of years to get that down to the county and adoption level, and then comes 24, and by 24 we should be. One big change is that we have resisted putting renewable energy, namely PVs, into the code itself. There's agreement that we will do that in 2021 because we've ratcheted down the efficiency measures just about as far as they can go. Cold climates are up to R40 insulation. That's about this much insulation. What if you put R50? Well, you're increasing the cost. You're doing very, very little good. So there's agreement to get PVs into there. So I'm the eternal optimist. I'd say by 2024 we're going to be, especially for residences, pretty gosh darn close.
Thank you.
Just to add, the university actually has a net zero mandate already. I can't remember the year off the top of my head.
Yeah.
2030.
Yeah, that sounds right.
They are universities in Canada, and Canada seems to be a little bit ahead of the curve.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And they have these mandates now, so that's pretty exciting.
Yeah. Well, I would point out that the state of Hawaii has a mandate for zero net energy by 2045. That's the entire, that's electricity production. But as the batteries get better and better, that has implications for EVs, electric vehicles, and electric vehicles are going to be coming down the pike like gangbusters pretty darn soon.
On that note, and then I let it go, but do you think there is, in regards to energy storage in residences, there is a connection to electric vehicles, meaning, okay,
Yes.
all right. How far away are we from that?
Not very far at all, because battery technology is getting better and better and cheaper and cheaper. That's something I failed to mention. Many of these materials that I've been talking about are getting lower in price and sometimes higher in quality. That's the case with batteries. So you can even use the electric vehicle batteries as home storage, or you can feed them into the grid, or you can do reverse and feed into the electric vehicle. Oh, I didn't mention that in the code, and the counties at first got pushback, but now they've agreed, including Honolulu County, there shall be mandated in the code a rough-in, a conduit, raceway, and outlet for electric vehicle charging stations, both commercial and residential. It's a lot cheaper to do that during the time of construction.
Great presentation. Thank you very much. I love all the facts, filled with information. As we get into warmer and warmer air temperatures, and as the trend for energy efficiency is to emphasize more reliance on natural ventilation,
Mhm.
you cross a point where if you don't have AC available, you
Mhm.
run into medical issues during especially hot days,
Mhm.
and especially for the elderly and
Mhm.
people with potential medical issues.
Okay.
All that comes crashing home during major El Niños when we get these really
Mhm.
hot days, and an El Niño is defined as no trade winds. So you,
Mhm.
and nights are not cooling
Mhm.
anymore.
Yeah, we're all, everyone in this room is having exactly that experience.
So there's a bit of a collision if we continue to de-emphasize AC, but the
Mhm.
temperatures are getting more and more towards
Okay.
medical problems.
One word, ceiling fans. Ceiling fans have different speeds, go under the high speed of ceiling fans, and your perceived body temperature goes down by 12 degrees.
I still see that as not sufficient to counteract the potentially deadly effects of really hot conditions on people who have medical problems.
Yeah, we've seen that. I remember there was a heat wave in Chicago some years ago, and some people, elderly people, were literally afraid to go out of their homes because of the crime in the area, and they literally died of heat stroke.
And also, one of the things that happens is you get blackouts, power blackouts, and
Mhm.
we've come close to that here in Hawaii, so.
Yeah. Which is an anti-AC argument.
Yes, but I guess my major point here is please consider the fatality-prone
Mhm.
heat wave issue.
Yeah, there is, in the tropical code, you can AC up to 50% of your interior square footage, so in this case, you might put a split system into one bedroom, and that would be the refuge.
Yeah.
Chip, if we have higher penetration of PV, then individual houses won't have trouble with blackouts.
If you have a battery also,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah.
And,
Just
But we're not there.
Sure, totally.
except that, again, I had as my guest Josh Powell, head of a major PV company, and he said, today, the Hawaiian Electric will not approve new PV installation unless it's accompanied by storage, again, because we just have too much of the stuff. We need to make it useful and store it. So we're gonna, storage is going to be coming on like gangbusters also. And, yeah, so one room, that's the cool refuge, and have a TV in there and everybody can cluster
So
in,
these
you know.
steps are all in the line of mitigation
Mhm.
with regard to climate change, reducing emissions, et cetera.
Yeah.
Also simultaneously think about adaptation and adapting to what climate change is going to be bringing us.
Mhm. As in get used to heat. Yeah, because the human Homo sapien and the cockroach are the two most adaptable species on the face of the earth. Yeah.
Are there other questions? Comments from the commission? I'd also like to open, both Gary, if you don't mind, sort of being brought back in, if there's any questions or comments from the public for both of you.
Yeah, we love questions.
One question for Gary.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Rocky Walden with the Resilience Office.
Yes.
But you mentioned the wind resistance standards for the transmission and distribution system.
Yes.
They're not up to date. So HECO has been on a pretty big program updating their transmission and distribution lines. Do you know if they've been going beyond what the current code is to update those for the what is it, NESC code at all? Do you have any insight into that?
I would suspect that they're not.
And then regarding, I was really interested in the low regrets sort of analogy you mentioned in terms of making investments and planning. Is there any place I could look to find someone who talks about low regrets versus no regrets type of planning? Is there any literature out there?
I don't have any specific, reading on that. What it means somewhat kind of depends on who's doing the paying. when I use the term, it's the, I mean that, if you spent something, you haven't overspent, and you know it's gonna deliver some good for you. And when I started using the term in that context, actually, I think some other people took a different viewpoint. Their idea of low regrets was, well, if it's someone else's money, have them spend it, and we're gonna cover as much of the future climate change as possible with that requirement. I tend to see things in the context of, okay, if say the government was gonna spend some of their taxpayer money on something, they would probably think about the concept of whatever you spend, make sure that you're not overspending on it, and you're getting a quantifiable good in the financial return of that investment, and then putting an additional investment down the line.
Hi, my name's Anthony Alto. We've met before. I'm making a documentary about climate change. I came in a little bit late on your presentation, so I apologize for that, but it looked to me like the assumption that you were making for the 500-year storm surge was that the sea level rise was 60 centimeters. And I wasn't, is that the case? Is that the?
Yeah, about 2 feet, and then we're assuming that the storm occurs during mean high water tide, and the storm we're using is a hazard consistent storm representative of the climatology at the end of the century. We're using the 500-year storm in the sense that if there's essentially 1 over 500 chance that that type of storm or something worse could happen any given year. So but it's a probability hazard level that's typically used for the type of facilities that I was discussing, which is essentially more major facilities, critical facilities, things of that nature.
So the reason I asked is because this commission has already, and in fact the mayor has already accepted this commission's recommendation to assume up to 3.2 feet of
Correct.
sea level rise by the middle of the century.
Yes.
6
End
feet.
of the century.
End of the century.
Well, in the latter decades of the century, was that the exact phrase, I think? And then with 6 feet for major infrastructure, and then the fourth national climate assessment, NCA4, that was released last November by the Trump administration, said we could be up to 8 feet. So I mean, all I'm trying to get at is the sort of recommendations that you're talking about here. Should we think of those as a low threshold, or in other words, could the situation be even more drastic than what your presentation is showing?
And I've got to interrupt and go. I've got a dinner meeting.
Thank you, we really appreciate your time, Howard, that was a great presentation.
Thank you, Howard.
Thank you.
Well, I think, I gave those recommendations in the context of the process of adaptive engineering. So
I think their modeling was done before our recommendation came
Right.
out, and there are tons of model
No,
experiments.
it wasn't intended to be as a criticism. I was just trying to get a sense of,
Yeah.
could the scenarios that we need to be planning for and thinking about be actually that much greater than what's in your PowerPoint?
They could be eventually, but again, I think in the context of design and construction, there tends to be a huge cost in trying to tackle the whole problem in one economic cycle. So, I think the idea is you you give it a context of a process that you're gonna update as you move forward in time, and you gain information, and you update the standard. I mean, you know, we wouldn't think that, okay, we're gonna adopt a code now,
For the end of the
and we're
century.
gonna hold to that until, for the next 80 years.
Right.
No, you're gonna change things as you become more knowledgeable. So I think it's, I'm trying to put essentially this effect into the same context as to how we deal with other environmental issues that we need to design for. And you always gain more information as you do that, you update the requirements accordingly.
So, we're actually reaching time, and I know that some staff had a hard stop at 5, so I wanted to sort of jump forward within the agenda. So sorry but maybe we can follow up on that after the meeting. So the next agenda item is discussion on developing a white paper. I'm going to suggest we table that and actually make that the primary topic of our next meeting, where I think we should have sort of a roll up our sleeves working and writing meeting for our next one. What do you all think?
I would like that, actually.
I have to do a little bit of research already on kind of other areas or other cities or states and what they're doing in terms of risk management. So I could, you know, just for a lit review on this paper, just keep that in the background and start working on pulling together some information.
That would be great. And so, that's kind of what I was thinking, if we could sort of dole out a few tasks today so that we come prepared for the next one. I have work in New York next week, and so I've actually scheduled a follow-up meeting with folks from Guy Carpenter, and particularly their analytics team. So if anybody has questions for their analytics team, if you can pass them through Ms. Vaughn, then I can follow up on that in my meeting with them next week.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to ask them about the Moody's thing too.
Mm-hmm.
They're asking people as well.
Yeah. And so I can bring some of that back also. Let's see. Any other thoughts for prepping for next week? Next meeting?
If the focus is insurance and the financial implication, it's a little bit out of my wheelhouse.
But I think the building codes aspect plays into that because it affects, they interplay to one another.
It's out of my wheelhouse, so give me a task.
Okay.
I have lots of comments in regards to the codes.
Okay. Maybe if you can bring those prepped, that would be really valuable for next session. Okay, great.
Do you have an idea for an outline of the paper?
Well, in general, I was thinking there's sort of two sides of this issue of climate change and risk, right? There's this issue of hazards risk, in which the building codes and land use ordinance interplay with things like insurance markets, right? And then there's the ratings risk that Josh gave some update on earlier, and this is really where bond ratings may be reflective of the hazards risk. So they all interplay to one another to some extent, but they're also separable to some extent.
So this is really a paper on here's what's going to happen if we don't do something.
And I was also viewing it as maybe if we could get some grounding on what's our baseline right now, right? So I was hoping actually that we could also maybe work with the office to pull some statistics on, or some data on what the city has. So for example, in our last meeting, we learned that there is approximately $100 million rainy day fund, that they are engaging in property insurance to the magnitude of about $300 million. So these are all kind of interesting data for us to have, and I'm wondering if we can push a little bit more on that data collection to see what else we're missing.
Is this more commercial, or are we looking at residential kind of risk as well, or?
That was both. So that was the city's kind of the city's engagement in a variety of different insurance mechanisms.
And then for this white paper, are we intending to cover residential and commercial, or governmental?
I think so, but all for input.
You know, the questionnaire that Moody's sent offers some guidance on what they're interested in knowing and where effort should be directed in order to keep the bond rating good.
That's a good idea as well. So
Yeah.
maybe when you and I can work to sort of gather some of this data between now and our next meeting, as well as some of the useful reports, and we can blast that out. And next meeting we can have sort of a working meeting.
So are you looking for, on the code side, the whole slew of codes, and they are they're in various stages of being updated.
Right.
So a more positive way of looking at it would be, here are some recommendations of areas that we think should be updated.
I think that would be really valuable.
Yeah, and I see that right now I struggle seeing them as part of the an insurance report, but I'm totally okay with it if, as long as I'm not tasked to tie the two together.
I think as we frame it as risk instead of insurance.
Yeah, I think the broad umbrella is risk, and insurance is one component
So
of
how do
risk.
we reduce our risk by updating codes?
These are the choices. I'll have to think too.
Okay, that sounds good. Okay.
Gary's PowerPoint offers
A lot to
a
start from.
plethora of suggestions and recommendations.
I think, Chip, I sent you the PDF of the 2017 report
Yeah.
that it's based on.
Is it okay if
Yeah,
we
absolutely.
Could you
distribute
forward
that?
that
Sure.
to me?
Yeah, can we all get it? Actually, then.
I'll send it to Win.
Okay, that'd be good. So a little background reading before our next meeting, that'd be good, so.
Because I have the draft, but I don't have the final report.
Right, Chip has the final one.
Okay. Okay, so, sorry, Courtney. Is there any public input for matters not on the agenda today any announcements? No, okay. Tentative next meeting date, actually Tuesday, November 13th doesn't work for me, so can we do that over, a doodle poll of all of us? And are there any other announcements? So my one announcement was the follow-up meeting with Guy Carpenter, so please send me anything you have.
I had one question for Gary. I was just Googling. Is this Oahu Multi-Hazard Pre-Disaster Mitigation Plan, the event that you're talking about?
Correct.
Okay.
It's on Eventbrite.
Yeah, that's what I found.
I wanted to announce that the sea level guidance has had some wordsmithing done to it, and it's a change in communication but not content. And the office has promised to put a special website up on the commission page where you can go directly to find the white pages.
Great.
If the commission has an opinion about what they would like to call that section, work product or reports or
White papers.
guidance or.
We have work products.
Cause it
Sure,
might not all be
it's
white papers.
More
governmental
generic.
enough, yeah.
We're gonna discuss that.
Yeah, we can
How
do
about
that.
something more active, like recommendations?
Courtney's trying to get out of here. It's
Yeah.
like Katrina.
It's like backing it up.
Yeah.
Last quick announcement, there was a letter from the State Climate Commission to the mayor, sort of following up on some of their activities, and we, a couple of, myself and a few others were CC'd in terms of, and we all have a copy. But I just wanted to announce this because it's there's a lot of follow-up in terms of complementing the sea level rise guidance and the directive that was done at the county level at the state level. So I think that's something that we should all be aware of.
So I'm actually working on this with the state on developing the agenda and co-sponsoring it through the East West Center.
Awesome.
We'll be tied in.
Okay, great. All right. So, anything else? I think we're at the end of the agenda, so we can just adjourn. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Nice meeting you.
Probably don't remember. In
Forever.
we talked about our. It must have been about 8 years ago when I was.
Years ago.
Yes.